Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kelly's Astrology podcast. This week's show is all about the lunar or full moon eclipse in the sign of Libra. This is the first eclipse for the year, and it's the first eclipse in the current eclipse season. Our current eclipse season will run until April 22, and any new and full moon we have in this time frame is going to be an eclipse. So I'm going to be talking about the lunar eclipse of March 25th in this episode, and check back for a future episode all about the solar eclipse in Aries, which is happening on April 8th. I'm going to save discussion about that for a future episode because right now we are in the lunar eclipse in Libra time. And so I want to share a few thoughts about that eclipse with you. For that Libra lunar eclipse, that's a full moon eclipse, expect lots of emotion as well as the possibility for release, healing, and realizations. Before I dive into all the info that you need to know about this South Node eclipse, a quick mention of my group mentoring program, which starts this Wednesday. I'll be teaching 2 ancient astrology timing techniques. If you're a self-motivated, intermediate, or advanced student and you want to add to your predictive astrology skills, I hope to see you in group this Wednesday. For more details or to register, pop over to kellysastrology.com. Now let's turn our attention back to this eclipse. In a recent blog post on this eclipse, I subtitled this Libra eclipse as being about release, endings, and subtle dreams. So let me tell you a little bit more about why I think this eclipse has to do with those kinds of things. A couple of technical pieces of info first. This lunar eclipse is on Monday, March 25th in most locations, and this eclipse is happening at 5 degrees of Libra. So it's quite early in the sign of Libra. Now, this is a full moon eclipse. Every time there's a lunar eclipse, it's going to be a full moon eclipse. But a full moon or a lunar eclipse can either be with the North Node or with the South Node. And whichever node the eclipse is with tells us a little bit more about the eclipse itself. This eclipse is near the South Node, and the South Node is all about letting go and about moving on. So under this eclipse that is in Libra on the South Node, you might be ready to forgive the past or move on from a situation that has drained you. The South Node is an indicator of things that might be draining or depleting. So you might come to a fuller realization of something in your life that is actually having a diminishing kind of depleting effect. Because it's an eclipse, there's also this energy about subtle shadows and barely clear realizations that are just hovering at the edge of your awareness. I'm going to say a little bit more about how to try to connect with that as we go today. Venus, who is the ruler of this eclipse in Libra, at the time of the eclipse, Venus is in the sign of Pisces. And there, Venus is focused on expansion and rediscovering joy. And that's due to her aspect with Jupiter in Taurus. To make things better now, you might need to change a habit or a pattern, or you might be willing to step away from a stagnant situation. The idea here is that if you want that improvement, that reconnection with joy or expansion, you're going to have to let something go, or you're going to have to stop doing something that might be inhibiting that. This eclipse in Libra is not a time to keep fighting or to keep pushing, but rather to let go, stop holding on so tightly, like literally that feeling of your hands letting go, but to step back and to watch what happens as you release your very tight hold on something. What happens when you're not the one encouraging things forward? Do things kind of stop? Do they fall apart? Do they get wobbly? Do other people step into the void? And this is what we're kind of working with under this eclipse is we're sort of stepping back so that an openness or a spacious can be created, or to see who or what might come in to that void or that emptiness. Now, this eclipse is in Libra, so we could think about the sign of Libra as one of the eclipsing places for now. And that's basically got to do with the transit of the South Node through Libra at the moment. And so the whole time the moon is in Libra, the sign of the South Node, and the sign where this eclipse is taking place, that's going to be about a 48-hour period. And through that whole time, you might find that events, feelings, and experiences are kind of unsettled, or you might feel a little bit out of sorts. There's sort of this out of the ordinary kind of interruption to regular programming or regular routines and rhythms. So that whole time the moon is in Libra can be in that sort of eclipsey theme. Now that'll include all day Monday and Tuesday Eastern time, so like Toronto, New York time. The moment of the eclipse itself, or that exact time of the full moon, is like a peak, but that energy and that experience of the release, the letting go, the standing back, the getting still, they can be felt both immediately before and after the eclipse. So, really, Monday and Tuesday Eastern time. So this eclipse is a South Node eclipse. And with the South Node in the mix, as well as Venus, the ruler of the eclipse in Pisces, this is definitely an eclipse that might shift your perspective and call you towards a much stronger spiritual focus. One of the simplest ways to kind of connect with the energy of the South Node can be to think a little bit about the Buddhist idea of non attachment, the idea of kind of allowing and observing without getting attached or fixated on how you want things to be. So, this focus or call to the spiritual might call you away from the material world, or it might call you away from ambitions for a period of time. And with this South Node in the mix plus Venus in Pisces, it might mean that you, during this eclipse, you really notice and feel into how your priorities are changing. And you might kind of really get clear on the fact that you're no longer willing to engage in the same old dramas, especially in relationships. And if I haven't said that already, Libra is a sign about interacting with other people. And so a lot of the patterns we're trying to change under this eclipse are about our friendships, our family relationships, and our romantic life. So we're trying to think about what are the tendencies that I fall into that don't serve me well when relating to others? And might I be willing to try a different approach? But certainly we're not willing to keep like trying to force or push things with other people, especially with those people that we feel quite drained by, or in those friendships or relationships, or we feel kind of flat after an encounter with that person. So that's what I mean by, we're not willing to engage in the same old dramas or patterns. Ultimately, we're trying to level up the quality of our connections in our life. But to do that, we have to be really honest about which connections are more kind of depleting or draining or unfulfilling. And if we're going to level up, we have to move away from those kinds of unfulfilling connections. The South Node is a deeply spiritual point, and it really is an influence that can resist a lot of modern life's so called pressures. And if you're really kind of open to tuning into the influence of the South Node now, you might realize that there are things you've been striving for that you've kind of been chasing for all the wrong reasons. And as you learn this, it might mean that you begin to question why you do what you do, and more importantly, whether you want to keep doing it. Maybe you'll be starting to think about maybe I want something different here, and I'm willing to act in a different way to try to get that. So, this idea of the South Node influence, it's kind of clearing out cobwebs, but it's also shifting your way of thinking and feeling. And so I really kind of encourage you to shift your perspective and consider choosing for yourself based on your own values and priorities, rather than feeling as though you need to keep the peace with people or society around you and doing things that might be approved or acceptable to others. So I think a lot about this South Node shifting perspective theme around this eclipse. And I also think about how that sort of shifting energy ties into a really core eclipse theme about changes to light and awareness and perception that occur during an eclipse. So when we're thinking about eclipses and we're thinking about light and shadows, What I want to just call your attention to a little bit here is that an eclipse is a time when the light changes and when shadows and darkness emerge where normally there is illumination or that sort of bright light. And so, as a result of that, changing light, changing shadows, what you notice will shift as well. So, working with this kind of shifting quality of light is a really important part of understanding eclipses and how to work with them. When the normally bright full moon dims, so when the light of the full moon is blocked or eclipsed, there are going to be new shadows. And in turn, you might need to slow down to let your eyes and your senses adjust, just the way you do after turning off a light. Like when you're getting ready for bed and maybe you get up to turn the main light off and you've got to sort of make your way to the bed, but in the darkness. And even though you kind of know where things are, I know for me, I tend to go a little bit slower as if I've got to pause and feel my way around rather than, when the light's on, I might just confidently stride about. And this idea of thinking about how you move in daylight, bright light, versus how you move around when it's dark, that is the kind of change in energy and the change in approach that we're looking for in an eclipse. So, this idea of feeling and sensing, which is kind of tied to the South Node too, because the South Node really brings us into kind of the belly, kind of this very visceral, emotional part of our awareness. And the energy of the eclipse has got this needing to feel and sense because we're not seeing so the way that we normally do. That idea of feeling and sensing are approaches that may be helpful as you navigate life under this Libra lunar eclipse. Slowing down might also be helpful as well. This is definitely not a time for rushing or even for deciding and doing. Instead, be still, notice, pay attention. And that reminds me of just a really simple, beautiful piece of instructions, essentially, from Mary Oliver, where she talks about her instructions for living, which are very simple and to the point. Mary Oliver says, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And I think under this eclipse, that first instruction about paying attention is really important. So you'll need to slow down. You're not going to be paying attention with your eyes. It's not the seeing kind of intellect skill that we're drawing on here. It's the sensing, intuiting, feeling, being with your body and seeing what wisdom it might reveal to you as you quieten down and as you slow down. During this eclipse, you might need to adjust your expectation. If we know it's a South Node eclipse and that has more of a depleting effect, we're not going to be as vital or as productive or ambitious as normal. Maybe you need to acknowledge that you might cover less territory or that you might get less done. And that will be probably because if you're thinking about feeling and sensing your way through rather than boldly powering forward or confidently and clearly making choices, if you're feeling and sensing your way through, you're going to move more slowly and you're going to be responding more deeply. This will actually help you pay attention to what those subtle messages might be. Not, and with that sort of paying attention, you're not paying attention to the world out there, but rather to the inklings and the ebbs and flows that are inside you, the subtle knowledge, the subtle wisdom that is within you, but is sometimes neglect in the fast paced, busy brightness of regular life. So, going a little further onto this light, dark, shadows theme, I really love the idea of sitting in darkness as an eclipse experience, sort of choosing quiet stillness in a sort of a darkened environment. So, as you turn off the lights, so to speak, maybe it's a literal thing where you're choosing to kind of just sit in some quiet, dark stillness, or maybe it's a symbolic thing where you're thinking about stepping back. Turning off the lights might mean being less social or staying at home rather than going out. As you turn off the lights, air quotes, what subtle needs and dreams might finally capture your attention? What little rustling or restlessness inside you that maybe you've been ignoring that you may be able to acknowledge? What inklings or realizations might emerge as you spend quiet time in the shadows? The darkness isn't necessarily something to be afraid of, but it does invite us to respond in ways that may be different from how we're normally living. What needs or desires from this kind of reflective, shadowy, darker place? What needs or desires that normally get overlooked by more obvious demands might emerge? And ultimately, this exploration of time in the shadows could reveal a hidden message for you, a piece of insight, or a need that might kind of solve something you've been grappling with. And in the busy brightness of regular life, you may never be quite still enough to notice. And that's where I think when we think about eclipses as an interruption of the regular pattern, I'd really invite you to consciously choose a different kind of day or couple of days for yourself to the best that you have the power to do so. More reflective time, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's meditating, maybe it's a quiet walk alone in the woods, just to see what the stillness might reveal in very subtle, kind of ethereal ways. And if there are any little realizations or subtle insights that you clue into, I really invite you to share them with us. Let us know in the comments below. Most importantly, since this eclipse, as I mentioned earlier, is about letting go, it's about not holding on, it's about changing patterns, I'd really encourage you to kind of stop that kind of fight or battle to the extent that you can to see what else needs to come forward. I wish you all a very insightful week under this quite potent South Node lunar eclipse in Libra. I will see you all next week for more. Until then, everyone, take care.